In the previous modules, we've been discussing personal identity, and we're going to continue with that discussion in this module. In the previous module, we saw that the personality view of personal identity has some problems, and we're going to be asking in this first video whether or not the body view of personal identity is any better. So remember that the personality view says that has this focus on continuity of personality. So you now are identical to someone else later if and only if your personality and the personality of that person are continuous in the right way. And so to test whether or not we think the body view is correct or the personality view is correct, the body view is saying that you are just identical to your body, and in particular, presumably your brain. We consider these personality switching cases where you and someone else are kidnapped, and the mad scientist then copies your personality to the other person's body and the other person's personality to your body. And the body theory says that what's happened is that you have survived a personality change because you're identical to your body and the personality associated with that body has changed. Whereas the personality theory says, oh, you've been swapped to the other body because your personality in the beginning is continuous with the personality that's now in the body after the swap. And we saw that there's some reason to think that the body view is correct, that because if we consider just the part of the case that happens to your body, the natural way to describe that is to say that 4 bad things happen to you. You're kidnapped, then your memory is wiped, then you're given false memories, and then you're tortured. And if that's the correct description, then you are survived the entire thing, and so you're identical to something that survives that entire process. And what survives that entire process is not your body, because that's been replaced, but rather, not your personality, that's been replaced, but your body. Your body is what we ask is what happens to your body, and then we decide that's what happens to you. So, and then the way we would describe the other body, what happens with the other body is that it gets, your memories, and it gets all of your beliefs and so on, and so it remembers what happened to you and mistakenly thinks that it happened to itself. So I think that's a natural way to describe that case, but it's not obvious. The personality splitting case is a real problem for the personality view, however. So in this case, there are 3 people that are kidnapped. Your body is destroyed, but then your personality is copied into the other 2 bodies. We saw that it's hard to say that you're both. So on the one hand, the personality theory says that you're both. Why? Well, because each of those bodies, the personality in each of those bodies is appropriately connected to your initial personality. And so the personality view says, oh, you're identical to both of them because each of them has the right connection. Each of them has that personality continuity. But you can't be both because they're not identical to each other. They're distinct from each other. And it's hard to see why you would be one but not the other because they're both equally related to you. Either you're both of them or you're neither of them. And so it seems like the correct thing to say is that you're neither of them. That means on the one hand that the personality theory is false, but also it's what the body theory tells us. The body theory would tell us that you're neither of them because you are your body, and your body doesn't exist anymore, so you don't exist anymore, and so you're certainly not either of them. So we might conclude that the personality view has problems and that we should prefer the body view. The personality view is not obviously true in the single copy cases, and it's refuted by the multi-copy cases because, again, in the multi-copy cases, the personality view says that you're both of them, but that can't be. So the body view is going to come along and say, yeah, the personality view is confused. The branching problem demonstrates that. If you were just a body view person, then you wouldn't have to worry about how to describe what's happening in the personality copying case. It's very obvious you've just been destroyed. So what we're going to ask right now is, okay, well, is the body view any better? Certainly it doesn't do so badly in the personality copying, in the personality duplication cases, but are there other cases that are problems for it? And as you're going to see, there are. So, but to get a little more sense of why the body view person thinks their view is superior to the personality view, it might help to consider an analogy between computers and bodies. So a computer, we can distinguish between the hardware and the software. The hardware is the thing. So like it's this, right? The software is what's running on the machine. It's all the programs and the data. It's this picture is stored on the device. So we might think there's a similar distinction between your brain and your psychology, that your brain is the hardware and your psychology is a software that's implemented in the brain. So the body view would then say, look, you are your brain. In other words, you're the hardware, not the software. You're the hardware on which your psychology is running. Just like, what is the computer? The computer is the hardware, and it runs the software. So you are your brain, and you or your brain is what's running your psychology. You know, your particular beliefs and memories and all of that. So the personality view then, because it identifies you with your psychology, and that's analogous to the software. And just like software, it can easily be copied, right? You move files around all the time between different computers. So similarly, well, not so easily, but you could move copies of your psychology around all the time. And yet, if we had the right technology, if we had the sort of the brain copying technology that we imagine the mad scientists to have, but you yourself cannot be copied, and that's why there's a problem. On the one hand, we can easily understand how your psychology can be copied, but since you can't be copied in that way, we shouldn't think of you as like your psychology or like software. On the other hand, on the body view, says the proponent of the body view, you're the hardware, and bodies and hardware don't easily duplicate like psychology and software, and so we shouldn't have a branching problem. But in fact, it's going to turn out that there are effectively, just like, so there's the copying, sort of the multiple copy problem for the psychology view. Well, there's a similar problem for the body view, and we're now going to see what that is in a series of cases. So let's consider our first example, a brain transplant case. So we imagine that, okay, we have the technology to transplant brains. We don't right now, maybe we never will, but maybe there are reasons to think, there are some reasons to think we may never will, but who knows, maybe we will be able to. So let's imagine that we do have the technology to transplant your brain, and that your body is severely damaged in an accident, and so we transplant your brain to a new body that perhaps we've grown in a vat. So your brain has been transplanted from one body to another. Do you still exist? It seems pretty clear that you do. You've been moved into the new body, and the brain view explains that the body view explains that very straightforwardly. Note that the personality theory would explain that as well, right? Because the personality in the first body and the personality in the second body are completely continuous. So this brain transplant case doesn't sort of speak in favor of the body view or the personality view, but certainly the body view can handle it very straightforwardly. It says, yes, which part of you are you? Which part of your body are you? You're your brain. We move that. Good, no problem. We understand that why we want to say that you're the same person after the that you have survived the transplant, that the person in the yellow body is identical to the person in the blue body. Why? Because they have the same brain. Okay. Now, here's an actual fact about our brains, that there's a lot of brain redundancy. Our brain is divided in half. It's got right down the middle here, and there are two hemispheres. They're connected, and there's a bit of the brain at the sort of back here, and down lower down. That's just one piece, but up top we have these two connected hemispheres. And they do a lot of different things. So like the light that comes into your right eye, the visual experience gets created in your left hemisphere, and all the processing that happens. And the light that goes into your this eye gets processed by all by neurons, by stuff that's happening on this side of the body. And there's all sorts of issues, sort of stuff like that, where things that happen on one side of the body get processed on one side of the brain, and things that happen on the other side of the body get processed on the other side of the brain. What's surprising, actually, is that there's this crossing, right? So I said that what comes in this guy gets processed on that side. That's right. It happens. That's the way. There's a cross. But also, there are different kinds of things happen on different sides. So, for example, on the left side of your brain, more or less, is where language processing happens, and not on the right side. But there's also redundancy. So, if the language center on the left side of the brain gets destroyed at a young age, the right side can actually take over and more or less do what the left side does in people who haven't been brain damaged. And there's also when people have brain damage later in life with a stroke, it frequently happens that there's recovery, and a large part of that is because the other side of the brain is able to take on the new task. So there's a decent amount of redundancy or potential redundancy in our actual brains, and this is just a sort of an important fact about how our brains work. Now, so let's have a fiction now. It's not the way things actually are, but let's imagine that actually there's limited redundancy, but let's suppose there were total redundancy, so that in fact the two hemispheres exactly duplicate each other, and they do the same tasks, or are capable of doing exactly the same tasks. This wouldn't make sense evolutionarily, but imagine that that's the way it happened, that that's the way our brains worked. So each side has a full implementation of your psychology, and now let's consider some more brain transplant cases. So in this case, we're going to consider another brain transplant case, and we're going to take advantage of this fiction of complete redundancy between the two hemispheres. So let's imagine that, again, you're in a bad accident, unfortunately, and that half of your brain is destroyed and only your right hemisphere survives. Still, your right hemisphere has survived, and so we transplant your right hemisphere. So, do you still exist? Well, this hemisphere is doing all the things it needs to do to be a person, because, right, it's doing vision and hearing, and it's got memories, and it can produce language and all of that. And it's got your particular memories as well, but what's critical is that it's a brain, and it's continuing to do whatever it needs to do to be a person. And it happens to be continuous with you, but it's with the personality before and after happens to be continuous, but the key thing is it's a brain that's continuing to be a person, right? And that's the fiction part. Well, what the body view tells us about this then is, do you still exist? Yes, you do, right? Why? Well, because we have a brain that persists and is continuing to be a person. And what do you need to persist? You need a brain that's continuing to be a person. So the body view would say you exist. The personality view agrees with that. This is not a way in which the personality view and the body view are differing. But we just want to get these cases clear about what is the body view saying, because we're going to have problems for the personality, for the body view. These would also turn out to be problems for the personality view, but what we care right now is just what we want to see is that in fact the body view is going to have problems as well. So you can, in terms of what we're going to say about personal identity, the personality view is going to agree with what the body view says in these cases, but the point is that there are problems, as we'll see, for the body view. So bearing that in mind, that we're not pulling them apart, we're just creating a problem for the body view. And we haven't gotten to the problem yet. Right now we just said yes. What does the body view say in this case? Yeah, the brain has survived, it's still supporting a person, and therefore the body view tells us that you still exist. Where are you? You're in the new body. And what are you? Well, you are your right hemisphere. Okay, well, weird, but that's what the body view says, given this fiction about, total redundancy on both sides of the brain. Okay, let's consider brain transplant case 3, and this is going to be the problem for the body view. And it's also a problem for the personality view, but what we care about is the fact that it's a problem for the body view. So, you're in an accident again. Your body's damaged, your brain is not. For some strange reason, we split your brain. And so one half of your brain is transplanted to one new body. The other half of the brain is transplanted to another body. It seems natural to say that you still exist. But now we want to know, if you do still exist, then which one are you? This is like the personality copying cases, and there are 4 possibilities, right? You could be both A and B. You could be A but not B. You could be B but not A, or you could be neither. What does the body view say about this case? Remember, in the personality copying case, the personality view said, oh, you're identical to both of them because your personality is continuous with both A and B, with the personality of A and the personality of B. What about in this case? So might you be both of them? Well, that is what the body theory says, right? The body theory says, yes, you are the same person as both of them. Why is that? Well, because each of them has enough of your brain, right? In the previous case, we saw that if we start off with the full brain and we transplant only half of it, then the body theory says, yes, you are identical to the person with half the brain. Half the brain is enough to maintain identity. Okay, good. So then A has enough of your brain to be you, and B has enough of your brain to be you. So both A and B are identical to you. But now, of course, this is exactly the same sort of, at a sufficiently abstract level, the same problem that the personality view has, right? A and B are distinct. But if you were identical to both, then A and B are identical to each other. Since they're distinct, they're not, and therefore you are not identical to both. And that means that the body view is false. The body view says you're identical to both of them because each of them has enough to be identical to you. To be identical to you, each has to have half of the brain that if anything that has at least half of your brain later is identical to you now. Well, A has half of your brain, and so it's identical to you, and B has half of your brain, so it's identical to you, right? You're both of them, but no, you can't be both of them. You can only be one of them at most, and so you're not identical to both of them, but the body theory tells us that you are both of them, right? The body theory is what says having half a brain is enough to be you, and that means the body theory is false. Just in the same way that the personality theory is false in the personality copying case. Now, the personality theory would say the same thing. The personality theory says, yes, your personality is continuous with both A and B because, as in our fictional world, having half of the brain is enough to be psychologically continuous. So this case is a problem for the personality view as well, but the key point is it's a problem for the body view. It means that the body view is not better off than the personality view because there are splitting cases, just like they're splitting cases for the personality view, they're also splitting cases for the body view, and the body view doesn't handle splitting cases any better than the personality view does. Well, are you A but not B? Are you B but not A? Well, first of all, again, those are not the things that body theory would say because body theory says each has enough to be you. And in any case, it's hard to see why you would be one and not the other. They each have equal claim to be you. Now, maybe the claim is good, maybe the claim is bad, but however strong it is, they can both make it with equal justification. And they can't both make it, and so, in fact, they both have the equal claim that they have to be you is not very good as well. And so you're both or neither. Well, yes, you're neither, because that's the only remaining alternative, and so when your brain is split in this way, you do not survive. You do not exist anymore because there's nothing later on that you're identical to. So, if we imagine that we could split and transplant the brain while preserving the function, and kind of like the way in which an amoeba divides, well, then body theory would say that the original is identical to each successor, but you can't be original to each successor, and that means that the body theory is false, and it's just like the multiple copies of your psychology case. So all three of our views have problems. Souls can't be re-identified. The psychology view and the body view both have problems with their splitting cases. In both cases, we can, in a way, sort of split the individual, split you, split me, whoever, in a way that the two later halves, as it were, are each sufficiently well connected to the original me that according to either the personality view or the body view, you're identical to both, but you can't be identical to both, and so both the psychology view and the body view are false, apparently. So the different ways that you might try to deal with this, what we're going to do in the rest of this module is look at some alternatives to the soul view and the body view and the psychology view that suggest that the way we've been talking about the problem of personal identity is a little bit mistaken. And so the question that these three views are trying to answer, maybe it's not a good question in the first place.